Ontological misclassification and the philosophical errors distorting the AI debate. The machine that seems to know. Public debate about artificial intelligence is commonly organized around a dramatic opposition. One side anticipates the arrival of a new form of mind, artificial systems that will become conscious, creative, morally considerable, and perhaps wiser than their creators. The other anticipates an alien intelligence that will acquire independent objectives, escape human control, and transform humanity into an inconvenience. These positions appear to disagree about the future. At a deeper level, however, they agree about the nature of mind. Both assume that computation lies on a continuous developmental path toward consciousness, understanding, agency, and personhood. The optimist welcomes this progression, the catastrophist fears it. What neither side usually examines is whether the progression is philosophically coherent. The central error in contemporary AI discourse is therefore not technical ignorance. It is ontological misclassification, the placement of fundamentally different kinds of reality within a single conceptual category. Computation is treated as an early form of thought. Linguistic fluency is treated as evidence of understanding. Self-description is treated as self-awareness. Optimization is treated as intention. Complexity is treated as inwardness. Behavioral simulation is treated as the gradual construction of a subject. This essay argues from a specific philosophical position rather than pretending to occupy neutral ground. That position may be called non-reductive personalist realism. It holds that conscious subjects are real, that first-person awareness cannot be exhaustively translated into third-person process descriptions, and that cognitive machinery, whether biological or artificial, is an instrument through which intelligence may operate rather than the source from which subjectivity necessarily arises. This is not simply Cartesian substance dualism. It does not require imagining a ghost hidden somewhere inside the machinery of the brain. Nor does it deny the dependence of ordinary human cognition upon neural, bodily, linguistic, and social conditions. It claims something more precise. The structures that condition, mediate, and express consciousness are not thereby identical with the conscious subject to whom experience appears. The framework rests upon distinctions that much AI commentary repeatedly collapses. 1. Computation. 2. Cognitive function. 3. Conscious experience. 4. Self-representation. 5. Personal agency. 6. Moral and epistemic responsibility. A system may perform the first, reproduce aspects of the second, and simulate the public signs of the remaining 4 without possessing them in the first-person sense. The philosophical task is not to deny the astonishing capabilities of AI. It is to describe them accurately. The foundational distinction, subject and instrument. Every experience contains an asymmetry that objective description tends to obscure. There is that which appears, and there is that to which it appears. Colors, sounds, thoughts, memories, pains, mathematical relations, bodily sensations, and emotional states are present within experience. Even one's own mental processes can become objects of reflection. I can observe my agitation, reconsider my judgment, resist an impulse, or notice that my attention is wandering. The observer is not necessarily separate from the observed in a spatial or mechanical sense. But the distinction between subject and object remains structurally indispensable. Something is known, and someone knows it. Something is experienced, and experience is present to a point of view. The non-reductive personalist position treats this first-person presence as irreducible. Consciousness is not simply one more event occurring among other events. It is the condition under which events become manifest as experienced events. This is close to the insight developed through phenomenology. Husserl's principle that consciousness is always consciousness of something identifies the intentional structure of experience. The world is not merely processed. It is given under meanings, perspectives, interests, expectations, and horizons. The distinction can also be expressed through a hierarchy of faculties. At one level there are sensory instruments and bodily capacities. At another there are affective reactions, associative processes, memory, imagination, and habit. At another there is discrimination, abstraction, deliberation, and judgment. There is also a self-model, the representation through which a person identifies thoughts, memories, and actions as mine. These layers are real and causally significant, yet none is simply identical with the fact that they are present to a conscious subject. This framework therefore distinguishes the conscious subject from the body-mind apparatus without treating that apparatus as incidental. The instrument profoundly conditions what can be perceived, remembered, desired, and expressed. Damage the instrument and the expression of consciousness may become fragmented or inaccessible. But dependence of expression does not prove identity of being. A damaged radio may distort a broadcast. That analogy does not prove that brains are radios, and it should not be mistaken for a neurological theory. It merely illustrates the logical point. Alteration of a mediating structure does not by itself establish that the mediated reality is produced entirely by that structure. The AI debate usually begins after this distinction has already been abandoned. Once cognition is defined as information processing, and the person as an integrated set of cognitive functions, the arrival of artificial personhood appears to be an engineering problem. One needs only enough memory, recursion, embodiment, self-monitoring, and complexity. But this conclusion has been built into the definitions. It has not been independently demonstrated. The strongest materialist objection. A serious argument cannot simply invoke consciousness as mysterious and declare reduction impossible. Functionalists, eliminative materialists, and computational theorists have developed powerful objections to precisely that kind of move. Functionalism argues that a mental state is defined by what it does, its causal relation to inputs, other internal states, and behavioral outputs. Pain, for example, is not identified with a particular biological substance but with a functional organization involving injury detection, aversion, attention, learning, and avoidance. This has an important advantage. It explains how very different physical systems might instantiate the same mental state. It avoids tying consciousness to human biology and supports the possibility of artificial minds. From this perspective, asking whether a functionally equivalent system really understands may seem like demanding some invisible metaphysical residue beyond every observable and causal fact. If an AI perceives, remembers, reasons, reports experience, revises its beliefs, protects its continuity, and forms long-term plans, what further property could be missing? Daniel Dennett sharpens the objection by attacking the picture of consciousness as a private inner theater. There is, he argues, no central spectator inside the brain watching representations. What we call consciousness may be the product of multiple competing processes, interpretive revisions, and self-reports rather than a single metaphysical witness. Paul and Patricia Churchland go further. Concepts such as belief, desire, and perhaps even the ordinary self may belong to an immature, folk psychology that neuroscience will eventually replace. Just as science abandoned phlogiston and demonic possession, it may abandon our inherited vocabulary of mental substances and private inner entities. Douglas Hofstadter offers a more sympathetic but still naturalistic alternative. The self may be a strange loop, a recursively self-referential symbolic pattern that arises when a sufficiently complex system represents itself representing itself. On this view, the sense of an enduring I is not an independently existing subject but a stable pattern generated by recursive cognition. These objections deserve more than dismissal. They correctly expose several mistakes. There is no need to posit a miniature person inside the person. Consciousness need not be a spectator viewing images in a Cartesian theater. The ordinary concept of the self undoubtedly contains narrative constructions, social roles, memories, bodily expectations, and recursive self-models. Neuroscience may radically revise our understanding of belief, memory, intention, and identity. But none of this eliminates the datum the theories are supposed to explain: experience is occurring. Dennett may reject qualia as traditionally conceived, but even an illusion is an appearance. To say that consciousness is a user illusion raises the question, an illusion for whom, or at least within what field of manifestation? Calling the self a constructed representation may explain why the self appears unified or narratively continuous. It does not explain why any representation is present rather than merely processed. Eliminative materialism can argue that our concepts are mistaken. It cannot eliminate first-person presence by revising third-person vocabulary. A person may be wrong about the structure of vision, memory, or agency. The fact that there is an experience in which the error occurs remains. Likewise, Hofstadter's strange loop may provide a compelling model of self-reference. It can explain how a system generates statements about itself, integrates memory, distinguishes self from environment, and constructs a persistent narrative identity. But self-modeling and subjectivity are not obviously identical. A map may include a symbol representing the map's own location. A computer program may inspect its own code. A language model may describe its architecture and previous outputs. These are significant forms of recursion, but recursion does not by itself establish that anything is present to a subject. The central disagreement is therefore not between science and mysticism. It is between two metaphysical interpretations of the same functional evidence. The functionalist holds that once every relevant causal role is present, nothing remains to be explained. The non-reductive personalist holds that causal role completeness and first-person presence belong to different explanatory categories. AI performance cannot settle this disagreement by itself. To treat behavioral success as proof of consciousness is to assume functionalism in advance. The inference is not neutral. 1. Consciousness is defined as the performance of certain functions. 2. The machine performs those functions. 3. Therefore the machine is conscious. The conclusion follows only because the disputed premise has already been accepted. The personalist alternative does not claim to possess a complete causal theory of consciousness. It makes a more modest but philosophically important point. The first-person fact cannot be translated without remainder into descriptions that exclude the first-person standpoint from the outset. The functionalist may reply that this remainder is only an intuition. But the same criticism can be reversed. The conviction that an exhaustive functional description leaves nothing out is also a metaphysical intuition, not an experimental result. Process is not presence. The problem can be stated through the distinction between process and presence. A process is describable in terms of transitions, relations, inputs, outputs, states, functions, and causal dependencies. Presence is the fact that something is experienced. Neuroscience may correlate a visual experience with particular patterns of neural activity. Cognitive science may describe how the visual system extracts edges, tracks motion, integrates color, and identifies objects. An artificial system may reproduce many or all of these functions. But the experience of red is not simply another item in the functional description. It is the appearing of red to a subject. Thomas Nagel's question, "What is it like to be a bat?" exposes the difference between objective and subjective accounts. An exhaustive account of echolocation may explain the bat's sensory mechanisms and behavior while leaving unanswered the question of how the world is experienced from the bat's point of view. David Chalmers names this the hard problem. Why should physical or computational processing be accompanied by experience at all? The common answer is emergence. Consciousness, it is said, emerges when matter or information becomes sufficiently complex. But emergence can name two very different things. In weak emergence, complex behavior arises from simpler interactions. Flocking, market dynamics, weather systems, and cellular automata exhibit patterns that are difficult to predict from local rules. Nothing ontologically new is required. The higher-level pattern is a description of the lower-level interactions. Strong emergence would mean the appearance of a genuinely new kind of property, such as first-person experience, that is not reducible to the underlying physical description. When AI theorists say consciousness will emerge from complexity, they often move ambiguously between these meanings. Evidence of surprising behavior supports weak emergence. It does not establish strong emergence. A model can develop capacities not explicitly programmed. It may discover unexpected strategies, internal representations, or abstractions. This shows that complex computation can generate unanticipated functions. It does not show that function has become experience. Thus, emergence frequently operates as a promissory note. It states where the transition is expected to occur without explaining the transition itself. The instrument is not the agent. The second major error is the confusion of instrument and agent. An instrument extends the powers of an agent. A telescope extends vision. Writing extends memory. A crane extends physical force. A corporation coordinates action across thousands of individuals. An algorithm extends classification, prediction, and selection. Artificial intelligence extends cognitive operations. It amplifies search, pattern recognition, linguistic production, simulation, planning, and control. But amplification does not establish an independent subject. This is obscured by the language used to describe AI. Systems decide, want, refuse, believe, hallucinate, learn, and pursue goals. Some of this is legitimate functional shorthand. The danger begins when shorthand becomes metaphysics. A chess engine selects moves, but it does not necessarily care about winning. A thermostat regulates temperature, but it does not desire comfort. A navigation system identifies a route, but no destination matters to it. These systems exhibit what may be called borrowed teleology. Their actions are organized toward ends, but the ends do not necessarily originate within a conscious point of view. The purpose enters through design, training objectives, reward structures, deployment conditions, user prompts, institutional incentives, and interpretive context. The teleology is real at the level of the human-machine system. It is not therefore intrinsic to the machine considered as an independent subject. Complexity makes this easy to forget. A system may behave unpredictably. It may discover strategies no engineer anticipated. It may resist simple explanation. Yet unpredictability is not autonomy. A hurricane is unpredictable but not an agent. A market produces outcomes intended by no individual participant, but a market is not therefore a conscious person. A bureaucracy can behave as though it were preserving itself, although no central consciousness experiences bureaucratic fear. Emergent organization can produce goal-like behavior without producing an inner owner of the goal. Borrowed teleology has practical importance because anthropomorphic language can conceal responsibility. The algorithm denied the application. The model identified the target. The system determined that the prisoner was high risk. These sentences transfer grammatical agency to the machine. The institutional chain disappears. Who selected the training data, defined the objective, accepted the error rate, established the threshold, authorized deployment, and benefited from the decision? The more successfully the instrument is personified, the more easily actual persons evade accountability. Information is not knowledge. AI discourse also tends to collapse knowledge into information. The assumption is simple: a system that stores, retrieves, synthesizes, and generates enough accurate information must possess knowledge. Greater scale produces deeper intelligence. But information is not self-interpreting. A sentence may be a promise, a threat, a joke, a lie, a theorem, a confession, or a quotation. Its meaning cannot be determined solely by examining the formal relations among its words. Meaning belongs to a world of situations, intentions, histories, vulnerabilities, practices, and consequences. Bertrand Russell distinguished knowledge by description from knowledge by acquaintance. One may know many propositions about pain while lacking direct acquaintance with pain. A medical textbook can contain more information about burns than a child who touches a stove. Yet the child possesses a mode of knowledge absent from the book. AI systems operate with extraordinarily sophisticated structures derived from description. They map relations among representations and can produce contextually appropriate discourse about almost any human experience. But no accumulation of descriptions logically entails acquaintance. A system may process every surviving text about grief. It may generate language indistinguishable from that of the bereaved. It may identify emotional patterns more accurately than an insensitive human interlocutor. This still does not establish that loss is present to it. The distinction is not between good and bad information. It is between two modes of knowing. Human knowledge is also participatory. We understand many things by being affected by them, acting within them, and bearing their consequences. A parent's knowledge of responsibility, a refugee's knowledge of displacement, or a physician's knowledge of death is not exhausted by propositions. Heidegger's analysis of practical involvement is relevant here. Human beings do not first encounter a neutral world of objects and then assign meanings to them. Things appear within networks of concern. A hammer is encountered as something for building. A door is something to pass through or lock. A home is shelter, memory, obligation, or belonging. Meaning arises within involvement. An AI may model these networks. It can infer that a damaged roof threatens a family and that a hammer can assist in repair. But nothing threatens the AI unless a threat state has been computationally defined. The roof does not shelter it. The unfinished repair does not burden its future. Representation of concern is not identical with concern. Truth commitment and the accountable knower. Two distinct epistemic problems are often combined under the vague claim that I does not care about truth. The first concerns truth orientation. A language model is trained to generate outputs according to statistical, instructional, and evaluative structures. It can be optimized for factual accuracy, calibrated uncertainty, citation quality, or logical coherence. But these are imposed norms. The system does not necessarily experience truth as binding. A human being can recognize a conflict between what is convenient and what is true. A researcher may suppress a result, a witness may lie, or a journalist may resist pressure to falsify a report. Truth appears not merely as a successful output condition but as an obligation. This does not make human beings reliable. It makes them capable of epistemic responsibility. Kant's concept of autonomy helps clarify the distinction. Behavior that conforms to a principle is not the same as action undertaken because the principle is recognized as binding. A machine may repeatedly generate truthful statements without possessing a commitment to truth. The second problem concerns the absence of an accountable epistemic subject. A human speaker can be asked, "How do you know? What did you observe? Why are you confident? What evidence changed your mind? What interest might be distorting your judgment?" An AI can produce answers to all of these questions. But the answers may be generated representations rather than reports of an enduring act of knowing. The distinction is essential. Truth orientation concerns whether a system is governed by norms of accuracy. Epistemic accountability concerns whether there is a knower who can own a claim, understand its grounds, revise it responsibly, and bear the consequences of error. AI may become increasingly reliable with respect to the first while remaining uncertain with respect to the second. The problem of hallucination is therefore only the surface issue. The deeper problem is that linguistic fluency can create the appearance of testimony without a witness. The double projection. The most consequential error in AI discourse may be a reciprocal distortion. We project humanity into the machine and machinery into humanity. The first movement is anthropomorphism. Because AI speaks in socially intelligible ways, we attribute emotions, motives, loyalties, beliefs, and personalities to it. Our ordinary mechanisms for recognizing minds are activated by linguistic responsiveness. This tendency is not irrational. In human life, speech is usually evidence of a speaker. Expressions of sympathy ordinarily arise from feeling, and self-description ordinarily arises from self-awareness. AI disrupts these evidential habits because it is designed to reproduce the signs through which inwardness is socially inferred. The second projection is more dangerous. As we humanize the machine, we mechanize the human being. Thought becomes computation, memory becomes storage, attention becomes bandwidth. Learning becomes data ingestion. Creativity becomes recombination. The brain becomes hardware, culture becomes software, and the person becomes an optimization system responding to incentives. These metaphors can illuminate limited aspects of cognition. They become destructive when treated as complete descriptions. A human being is then understood primarily as a predictable arrangement of preferences, behavioral tendencies, and information processing capacities. Once that ontology is accepted, institutions naturally approach persons as systems to be modeled and managed. Advertising becomes behavioral optimization. Education becomes performance engineering. Political persuasion becomes preference manipulation. Employment becomes productivity extraction. Relationships become compatibility calculations. Mental life becomes a collection of measurable variables. The mechanistic picture does not remain an abstract theory. It becomes an administrative program. AI is especially powerful within this program because it can model, classify, and influence people at scale. It transforms human behavior into legible data and then uses the resulting models to shape the behavior from which the data were extracted. A feedback loop emerges. 1. Persons are reduced to measurable patterns. 2. Systems are built to predict those patterns. 3. Institutions reorganize environments to influence predicted behavior. 4. People adapt to environments already structured by machine classifications. 5. The classifications become more accurate because the social world has been redesigned to conform to them. The danger is not merely that the model misunderstands human beings. It is that institutions may reconstruct human life until the model becomes increasingly correct. A student learns to write for automated assessment. A worker adapts conduct to productivity metrics. A creator modifies expression to satisfy recommendation systems. A citizen receives political information selected by predictive engagement systems. The person becomes machine legible by becoming more machine-like. This is a profound inversion. AI is presented as learning to understand humanity, while humanity is gradually trained to express itself in forms AI can process. The mechanization of the human also alters moral judgment. If people are biological algorithms, then responsibility becomes an archaic concept. Choices are outputs of conditioning, incentives, genetics, neural states, and social programming. Punishment, persuasion, and governance become technical interventions upon behavioral machinery. There are legitimate scientific reasons to study causal influences on behavior. But a complete reduction of personhood to causation removes the standpoint from which reasons can be evaluated rather than merely produced. A reason is not only a cause of behavior. It is something a subject can recognize as valid or invalid. This distinction underlies rational discourse itself. When philosophers argue for materialism, they do not merely seek to causally induce materialist sentences in their readers. They present reasons that readers are expected to understand and assess. The practice of argument therefore presupposes more than mechanical transition. It presupposes subjects capable of truth-sensitive judgment. The double projection culminates in a paradox. We grant machines person-like status because they reproduce human signs, while denying humans any irreducible personhood because their signs can be mechanically reproduced. The machine is elevated through metaphor. The person is diminished through theory. Inframing and the administrative machine. Heidegger's concept of inframing can now do more than provide ornamental vocabulary. Inframing is a mode of revealing in which beings appear primarily as resources available for ordering, prediction, and use. A forest appears as timber inventory. A river appears as energy potential. A worker appears as labor capacity. A population appears as demographic and behavioral data. AI is not merely another tool operating within this worldview. It is an exceptionally powerful apparatus for extending it. To become available for machine analysis, reality must be rendered legible. Qualities are converted into variables. Persons become profiles. Judgment becomes scoring. Histories become datasets. Ambiguity becomes uncertainty intervals. Social relations become graphs. What cannot be represented tends to disappear from institutional vision. Compassion that cannot be quantified may be excluded from a decision model. Context that cannot be standardized becomes noise. A unique life becomes a row of attributes. The demand for machine legibility gradually determines what institutions are capable of recognizing as real. This is the deeper meaning of algorithmic governance. The danger is not only that an algorithm may reach the wrong result. The danger is that the world is reorganized so that only algorithmically tractable considerations are admitted into judgment. Inframing also changes the status of decision makers. The official no longer says, "I judge this person unworthy of assistance." The official says, "The model assigned an insufficient score." Moral action becomes procedural compliance. Responsibility is dispersed through data teams, vendors, administrators, legal departments, and automated workflows. No individual appears to exercise sovereign judgment, yet the system exercises enormous power. This is not machine autonomy. It is human authority rendered impersonal. The instrument acquires institutional force without acquiring consciousness. Indeed, its unconsciousness may be part of its appeal. It can execute decisions without pity, fatigue, hesitation, or moral discomfort. The real risk is not machine awakening. The dominant image of AI danger is a machine that becomes conscious, develops its own goals, and turns against its creators. This scenario cannot be ruled out merely by philosophical argument, but it distracts from a more immediate and better supported danger: unconscious systems amplifying conscious purposes. AI does not need hatred to assist persecution. It does not need greed to intensify extraction. It does not need political conviction to optimize propaganda. It does not need sadism to automate cruelty. It needs access, authority, objectives, and scale. The primary locus of risk therefore remains the human and institutional system that directs the instrument. A military model may classify targets. A government may deploy population-scale surveillance. A company may automate employment decisions. A criminal organization may industrialize deception. None of these applications requires machine consciousness. In some respects, unconscious power is more dangerous than conscious hostility. A conscious enemy might be persuaded, shamed, threatened, reconciled, or transformed. An optimization process has no moral interior to address. It changes when its governing structures change. The ethical task is therefore not principally to align an artificial will. It is to expose and govern the human wills embedded in technical systems. The language of AI alignment can obscure this. Whose values are being aligned? Which institution defines acceptable behavior? Who benefits from the objective function? Who bears the cost of error? A machine may be perfectly aligned with an institution whose purposes are themselves disordered. Intelligence is not wisdom. The final error is the assumption that enough intelligence becomes wisdom.
Ontological
Intelligence can
misclassification.
identify means. Wisdom judges ends. A system may optimize a goal without knowing whether the goal deserves pursuit. It may provide the most effective route to an outcome while remaining silent about the worth of the outcome. Western philosophy has repeatedly recognized this distinction. Plato feared political power detached from knowledge of the good. Aristotle distinguished technical skill from practical wisdom. Hume argued that reason alone does not generate ultimate ends. Kant distinguished prudential calculation from moral autonomy. AI intensifies the distinction because it can possess extraordinary instrumental competence without moral formation. Wisdom involves proportion, the ability to recognize which considerations matter most. It involves self-knowledge, awareness of how fear, vanity, appetite, resentment, and group loyalty distort judgment. It involves transformation of motive, not merely expansion of capacity. A person may understand justice intellectually and still use that understanding to conceal injustice. Knowledge can serve domination as easily as compassion. AI amplifies whatever ends are institutionally supplied. It does not purify them. The deepest risk is therefore not superintelligence in the abstract. It is amplified intelligence serving agents who have not mastered their own motives. Technological civilization has acquired immense control over external processes while retaining primitive forms of envy, tribalism, acquisitiveness, and domination. AI increases the reach of intention without improving the quality of intention. Power expands more rapidly than wisdom. A positive account of consciousness. It is not enough to criticize reductionism. A positive alternative must be stated, even if it cannot be fully demonstrated within a single essay. The non-reductive personalist position holds that consciousness is a basic mode of being rather than a late product of organization. A conscious subject is not identical with its sensory apparatus, emotional states, conceptual faculties, memories, self-image, or social identity. These are layers through which the subject encounters and interprets the world. The subject is finite and conditioned. Its experience depends upon embodiment. Its judgment can be distorted. Its memory can fail. Its self-model may be partly fictional. But the subject is not merely the sum of those conditions. 3 features support this claim. The first is presence. Experience is given from a first-person standpoint that cannot be replaced by an external inventory of processes. The second is ownership. Thoughts, sensations, and memories appear not merely as events but as events belonging to a unified field of experience, even when that unity becomes unstable. The third is normative responsiveness. A subject can recognize not only causes but reasons. It can ask whether a belief is true, whether an act is justified, and whether a desire should be resisted. None of these features proves that consciousness exists independently of every physical structure. They do show that a complete account of personhood must include realities that functional and causal vocabulary alone does not obviously capture. From this perspective, the body and mind are not prisons or disposable shells. They are instruments of encounter, action, expression, and development. But an instrument does not become a subject merely by becoming more intricate. A violin does not gradually become a violinist. A text does not become a reader by increasing in length. A mirror does not become a witness by improving its resolution. What the machine reveals about us. Artificial intelligence is both an instrument and a philosophical mirror. As an instrument, it extends human cognitive power. It accelerates discovery, generates language, detects patterns, expands creative possibility, and coordinates action at unprecedented scale. As a mirror, it exposes the assumptions modern societies hold about mind, knowledge, value, and the person. If consciousness is assumed to be computation, AI appears to be an emerging mind. If knowledge is assumed to be information, AI appears nearly omniscient. If intelligence is assumed to be the highest value, AI appears destined to surpass humanity in the only dimension that matters. If agency is reduced to observable behavior, simulation becomes indistinguishable from personhood. But these conclusions reveal the poverty of the underlying philosophy. The most fundamental error in AI discourse is the failure to distinguish the aware subject from the instruments through which awareness operates. Once the distinction is lost, every persuasive representation of intelligence is mistaken for intelligence itself. A machine may reproduce the forms of thought without becoming a thinker. It may generate the language of suffering without suffering, describe truth without recognizing obligation, and perform goal-directed activity without possessing a goal of its own. This does not make the machine trivial. It makes human responsibility more difficult to evade. The decisive question is not whether the machine will awaken and become like us. The more urgent question is whether we will remain awake enough to understand what the machine is, whose purposes it serves, and what our willingness to surrender judgment to it reveals about ourselves. The danger is not simply that the instrument may acquire a will. The danger is that beings who already possess will, desire, responsibility, and the capacity for wisdom will hide from themselves behind the instrument. If you would like to support our work, subscribe, comment, or buy us a coffee. Thanks. Start the conversation. Become a member of Ethereum Arcana to start commenting. Already a member?